Imagine a civilization, right? Thriving over 4,000 years ago. They were building these incredible cities, way more advanced than a lot of places in the world at the time, and then they just vanished. They even left behind a script that we still can't read today. So we're going to dive in and uncover the secrets of the Harappan civilization. This is a huge piece of world history, and honestly, a super important topic for anyone prepping for competitive exams. All right, let's kick things off with this one little object, a Harappan seal. It's carved from a soft stone called steatite, and what you see is this creature, kind of like a bull, kind of like a unicorn, and all around it is this script that has had scholars scratching their heads for a century. This one tiny artifact, it's like a little window into their advanced and pretty mysterious world. So you gotta wonder, right? What story are these symbols trying to tell us? How did a society that could make something this intricate build their whole world? And the biggest question of all, why did it all just disappear? In this explainer, we're going to follow the clues and try to find some answers. To do that, we're going to break it down into 5 key parts. We'll start with how this lost world was even discovered. Then, we'll get into their mind-blowing urban engineering. After that, we'll take a look at their daily life, uncover their huge trade networks, and finally, we'll investigate why it all came to an end. Okay, first up, let's get our bearings. Who exactly were the Harappans? Where did they live? And when did all this happen? Now, if you look at this timeline, you'll see the Harappan story is a really long one. It starts way back around 6000 BCE with what we call the early Harappan phase. This is where you see farming villages slowly starting to grow into towns. But then, around 2600 BCE, boom, something amazing happens. The mature Harappan phase kicks off, a 700-year golden age of huge, bustling cities and incredible innovation. But after 1900 BCE, things take a turn, and the long, gradual decline begins. And what's just staggering is the scale of it all. I mean, we're not just talking about a couple of cities here. The Harappan world was enormous. It covered parts of modern-day Afghanistan, Pakistan, and northwestern India. It was one of the 3 great early civilizations right alongside Egypt and Mesopotamia, but it was easily the most widespread of them all. So how in the world do you manage a civilization that massive? Well, the secret sauce, if you will, was their most incredible achievement, an urban revolution, all built on brilliant engineering and some seriously meticulous planning. Just take a look at this map of Mohenjo-Daro, one of the crown jewels of the Indus Valley. The first thing that probably jumps out at you is just how orderly it is. The city is so neatly divided into 2 distinct parts. That's a huge clue that this was a society that really valued planning and precision. So archaeologists have a name for these 2 parts, the citadel and the lower town. The citadel, that was the smaller section, built up on a high mud brick platform and walled off. It's where you find the big public buildings, like the famous Great Bath and huge warehouses. Then, down below, you had the much larger lower town. This was the main neighborhood where people lived, and it was also protected by a wall. But the real genius, was the infrastructure. These cities were laid out on a grid, with streets crossing at perfect right angles. And running underneath those streets, the most advanced sanitation system in the ancient world. Seriously, every single house was connected to these covered drains. It was such a marvel that archaeologist Ernest Mackay, who was excavating back then, called it the most complete ancient system as yet discovered. He was blown away. And this obsession with order didn't stop at city planning, not by a long shot. Just look at these. On the right, you've got these uniform, baked bricks. They use the same kind across hundreds of different sites. And on the left, those perfectly cut cubes, those are weights. They were part of a standardized system made from a super hard rock called chert. This level of standardization across such a huge area, well, it suggests there was some kind of powerful central authority, or at least a set of commercial rules that everyone followed. And this is where it gets really, really clever. As you can see from this table, they actually used a dual system for their weights. For the small, valuable stuff, like maybe jewelry, they used a binary system, 1, 2, 4, 8, and so on, which is incredibly precise. But for heavier goods, they switched over to a decimal system, which is more familiar to us. That flexibility shows they had a pretty amazing grasp of math, all tailored for practical, everyday business. Okay, so we've got these incredible cities, right? But who are the people walking those streets? What was life actually like for them? Let's shift gears now and look at their economy and their society. At the heart of it all, of course, was farming. These folks were skilled farmers. They grew a whole range of crops, wheat, barley, lentils, you name it. They also domesticated all sorts of animals, not just for food, but as a crucial source of power for farming and for getting around.
This solid agricultural base is what created the food surplus they needed to support huge cities, specialized craftspeople, and probably a ruling class too. And we have clues about this, like this little terracotta bowl here. Finds like this suggest that oxen were super important. They were probably used to plow the fields and to pull bullock carts, which were likely the main way they moved goods and people around on land.
Now, beyond farming, the Harappans were absolute master craftspeople. It's like different towns had their own special skill, usually based on what raw materials were nearby. So Chenhudara was a big center for making beads. Coastal sites like Nagishwar and Balakot were all about making things from shells. And they even set up a settlement way out in Afghanistan, a place called Shortugai, specifically to get their hands on that beautiful blue stone lapis lazuli. And all this amazing craftsmanship, well, it wasn't just for local markets. This is what fueled a vast, complex web of trade that connected the entire Indus Valley to the wider world. How do we know they were trading so far away? Well, check this out. This very distinctive black jar is 100% Harappan, but it was found hundreds of miles away in modern-day Oman. And even cooler, chemical analysis of copper artifacts found in both Harappan sites and in Oman shows they came from the same source. That's solid proof of a busy sea trade route across the Arabian Sea.
And you know, it's not just stuff we've dug up out of the ground. We actually have written records from other civilizations. Cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia, that's modern-day Iraq, talk about trading with these faraway lands. They mention a place called Dilmun, which we're pretty sure is Bahrain, Magan, which was likely Oman, and a place they called Maluha, a land of seafarers, which almost everyone agrees was the Harappan civilization.
So, how did they pull off all this long-distance trade securely? Well, that brings us right back to those seals we started with. They weren't just pretty objects, they were really practical tools. When a bag of goods was ready to be shipped, they'd cover the knot in wet clay and then press a seal into it. If that clay seal, or sealing, arrived at its destination unbroken, the buyer knew their cargo hadn't been messed with. It was basically an ancient security tag that also told you who the sender was.
So, for centuries, this incredibly complex, urban, and interconnected world was just humming along beautifully. But it didn't last forever. Let's move to our final section and see how this amazing civilization finally came apart. For the longest time, the end of the Harappan civilization was one of history's biggest whodunits. Was it an invasion? A massive flood? Well, modern science is now pointing to a much slower, more devastating culprit: climate change. And as this timeline shows, it wasn't a single bad year. It was a series of brutal, centuries-long droughts that just relentlessly wore down the very foundations of their society.
And this isn't just a guess. As a major study in the journal Communications, Earth and Environment puts it, the downfall was because of a series of prolonged droughts. These weren't just dry spells. We're talking about multi-generational crises that wrecked the monsoon rains, choked the rivers they needed for trade, and turned farming into a desperate gamble. The entire system, so brilliantly put together, just slowly starved.
And that really leaves you with something to think about, doesn't it? The Harappans weren't fragile, they were survivors. They adapted to a changing climate for almost 2,000 years. But in the end, even their amazing ingenuity had its limits. Their story, etched in the ruins of their great cities, is a 4,000-year-old warning about that delicate balance between civilization and the environment. A message that, let's be honest, hits closer to home today than ever before. What can their struggle teach us about our own?